Hi, everyone. So, today we're going to learn about the revolutions that took place in Europe and Latin America during the time of the Industrial Revolution. So, the overarching question is, how did revolutionary ideals in Europe and Latin America ignite these uprisings in the first half of the 19th century? So we're really talking probably during the age of Napoleon. So 1800 to 1815 is the period that we're really going to be talking about here. So this very first section is an age of ideologies, and that would be, conservatism, liberalism, nationalism, and all of these are different systems of thought and belief. And that is what an ideology is. It's a system of thought and belief. And those are really the big three: liberalism, nationalism, and conservatism. Those are the big three ideologies that are going on here. So we're going to look at what events proved that Metternich was correct in his fears. So Metternich, if you aren't aware, he was, if you don't remember from learning about the Concert of Europe, the Council of Europe, he was the foreign minister of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? So he played an important role in those meetings and that diplomacy after the end of the Napoleonic Wars and the downfall of Napoleon. So um, this our story today really starts in the year 1815 then, because if you remember back, like to our French Revolution unit, it was that year, the year of Napoleon's defeat, that the major powers of Europe come together in the Congress of Vienna. Now, again, the Congress of Vienna is there to try and deal with the problems that were caused by Napoleon, like the new borders that had been created. We've got insecurity during this time, and he put in all kinds of new monarchs. Remember, he appointed his family members as monarchs in some European countries like Spain. He expanded France's borders, changed the borders of Europe. So the Congress of Vienna was formed, and they're trying to address these problems, and they're sitting there trying to figure out how they're going to solve these problems. So in the end, they decided they were going to establish what becomes known as the Old Order. And the Old Order means that they're searching for stability, legitimacy, and they want a balance of power. Stability means they wanted to maintain stability within their own countries. Legitimacy means, these are the old monarchs which were taken off the throne by Napoleon. Those old families, they're going to come back. They're going to be put back into power in all these different European countries. And the balance of power means that there will be no time where one country can become so powerful as to threaten the security of all the other countries, as France had done under Napoleon. And this leads to a thing called the Concert of Europe. So this would all sound very familiar to you. We've talked about this. And in the Concert of Europe, the major European powers of Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia decide that they're going to back each other up. That if one power decides to attack one of them, all of the others will come to the aid of the attacked power. And so Metternich, the foreign minister of Austria, if you go back to the Council of Europe that we learned about in our unit on the French Revolution, Metternich, again, he was the foreign minister of the Austrian Empire. He was correct in his fears about nationalism and how things are just going to kind of fall apart. And he was a leader of international conservatism during this period. And himself and other conservatives are going to fight against the ideals of liberalism. So if you're taking notes, this is the important thing. You need to understand the differences between these ideologies: conservatism, liberalism, and nationalism. So first is conservatism, right? They're going to make sure that all liberal revolts are completely shut down. And that means they're going to be doing this both at home in their own countries and abroad in other countries. So if we look at conservatives, really when you look at it, conservatives, they want to maintain the status quo, right? They don't want to change. They want to keep the things as they are. And that's what conservatives in the Concert of Europe wanted. They wanted to keep things as they are. And when you look at conservatives of this era, of this time, it's really because of the fallout from the French Revolution and from Napoleon. Throughout the French Revolution, things are really chaotic. Remember the Reign of Terror, right? And all those types of things. And so it causes conservatives of Europe to kind of think about the good old days before that, which may not really have been all that great, but in their minds it was, in comparison to what was going on. It sure seemed pretty good to them, the good old days. So they wanted to return to monarchies. They view all of these changes that people are calling for during these revolutions as part of the reason behind all of the chaos. And again, conservatives and liberals would both argue that they have the best interest of all at heart. And really, when you look at it, having a group of people who want to make sure that things don't become too chaotic, that there is some stability, that we think long and hard about the changes that are being made, you do need that in a society to be able to balance out some of the other things, the more extreme views. So when we look at liberals, they're a little bit different. Liberals, this is mostly the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie, you should know, is like the more the middle class, the growing middle class at this time. And if we look at seeking change, the big part for a lot of these groups, the reason they're seeking changes is that the good old days really for them didn't have large numbers of middle class business people, right? So if it didn't have working class people who were in factories, because those didn't exist before the time of the Industrial Revolution, before this time period. And so a lot of the liberals are looking at the new world saying, well, we can't go back to those good old days that the conservatives want because we weren't part of the good old days. This is something new, something different. We need to change in response to all of this, to this new world. And the things that they're really pushing for are US style governments, constitutions, republics. Also, when you look at natural rights, they want to see universal suffrage for all adult men. And this means they wanted to give all adult men the right to vote. And they really wanted to see an economy that was based on Adam Smith's laws, his view of economics, the laissez-faire, hands-off, form of economics, and let the natural laws of the economy run. Don't have the government interfere, which is a big change from the old way of doing things. What the conservatives would have wanted, and what it used to be like before this, before Adam Smith and the ideals of the Enlightenment that we learned about, it used to be the monarch pretty much decided everything that was being done, including in terms of the economy, right? So the conservatives would have preferred a more active government, right, and a more involved government, and preferably with a monarch in charge, right? Liberals would have wanted a constitutional republic, something like a U.S. style government. They would want maybe some involvement from the government in terms of the economy, but very limited, right? They want individual freedom, natural rights, life, liberty, property. That's what liberalism is. And just think back to the Enlightenment unit that we studied, right? That was very liberal. So liberals were directly inspired by the Enlightenment. You can see Thomas Jefferson. He was one of those figures we learned about. He's up in the top right, a quote from him. So keep that in mind. Liberals were inspired and influenced directly by the Enlightenment. So for nationalists, these are people who have a common identity, a common language, a common ethnicity, a common history. And there's a growing call from these people, from nationalists, for these small ethnic groups to have a place to call their own, to become their own nation, to become their own unified country. And so if you look at this map of Hungary and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you can start to see that there are lots of different ethnic groups as part of this. Each color on this map is a different ethnic group, right? And so you have Germans, you have Poles, Croats, Czechs, Serbs, Italians, Romanians, Slovaks, all of those different peoples, different ethnic groups in one single empire. And it's going to be really hard to create kind of a unified country when you've got that much diversity. And diversity is a good thing. We view it today usually as a good thing. But when you don't give the different ethnic groups, give them a way to express themselves, if you don't give them a way to have their own identity, if you don't give them some limited autonomy, and by autonomy I mean self-rule, the ability to govern themselves and have a say over the government, it's really going to cause problems if you don't give them that. And so the Austro-Hungarian Empire is one example, right? And the Ottoman Empire is another example as well. The and the Russian Empire is a third example that have these multinational groups in there that are really going to face a tough time here, especially as there's more calls for change. There's a plus and a minus side to this nationalism. It does inspire and unite people, right? As you see here, but you also get a great deal of intolerance, right? So again, it inspires, unites people to form around this idea of nationalism, but you also get some intolerance and persecution when you get this idea of, well, our group is better than their group, right? So Serbia is one of those places, one of these places that really has it all really kind of put together. They have a leader who is willing to kind of step forward and try and lead this charge for Serbia gaining its independence. Now, the other thing Serbia has is they are Slavic, which is what the Russians are. And so they're going to get support from Russia to move towards self rule, to get autonomy, right? And during this time period, Serbia is under the control of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans are a different ethnic group, and they have basically subjugated Serbia. And sooner or later, the Ottomans are going to kind of realize maybe the day has come, right? And they're going to give Serbia some self rule. Now, eventually, places like Bosnia, Serbia, Montenegro, those places are going to fall under the control of the Austro Hungarian Empire. And they're going to go back to where they were, basically, being subjugated and made part of another empire and being controlled by an outside group, a different ethnic group. And this whole thing's going to start all over again. You're going to have, it's going to produce more problems. And that will be one of the leading causes of World War One. Nationalism is a leading cause of World War One, which you will learn about next semester. But the important thing to keep in mind is that nationalists are very patriotic, loyal to their country, to their nation, and they view their nation as having a common shared culture, identity, language, right? And so that's what a nationalist is. Greece is one of those places that was successful in getting independence during this time. There was a nationalist movement in Greece, and they got help from Europe, mostly because Europe wanted to see Greece free from the Ottoman Empire. So you can see again these empires: Ottoman Empire, right? They lose Serbia, they're losing Greece, they lost Greece, and these places want to become independent. They want to determine, they want self determination to be able to govern themselves. Now, the flip side of this is that they were allowed to gain their independence and they got help from the rest of Europe, Greece did, to get their independence. But they were put under the control of a German king, right? So when you look at Metternich, who's encouraging some of this independence for certain places, the flip side of this is that he wants to maintain monarchies and legitimacy. And that's where Greece is not totally independent, as it would seem. And then you can see other places where Metternich wants these revolts and revolutions to be squashed quickly. There were other liberal revolutions that start to take place in 1848, in the 1800s, and he doesn't like this. The conservatives do not like this. So Spain, Portugal, and the Italian provinces, what ends up happening is when these revolutions and these revolutionary ideas are picking up steam, right, they're becoming more popular, he wants this to be done and put to a stop. So he encourages France to send their army into Spain and put an end to it there, and also into Italy to squash them. The Austro-Hungarian Empire goes into Italy to put an end to these revolts and revolutions, to try and keep monarchies in place and to try to keep stability and the status quo. And so when we look at these three things that are all coming together, you have liberalism, you have nationalism coming together, the new industrial working class. It's really going to create an explosive mixture that's going to continue to kind of build up pressure, and you're going to see that this pressure eventually does get released in World War One, which ended up being the deadliest human war in history up until that point. So let me know if you have any questions in the meantime about this lesson. I'll make sure to try to help you out.